Who does that?
Well, good morning, everybody. So glad that you're back with us for week 2 of our series called Who Does That? Last weekend, Jeremy kicked the series off, and he basically started the whole series by telling us that we're all weird, okay? I don't know if you were as offended as I personally was, but that's really what last week's message was about. And so he talked about all kinds of things that we do that might be seen by some as a little bit weird, right? He talked about people who wear socks with their sliders, and anybody do that, right? We talked about that. We talked about people who put mayonnaise on their fries, and apparently, out of all the things that he talked about, those were the 2 that ruffled the most feathers. So I was out in the lobby last week, and I just kept getting bombarded with people who like to wear socks with their sandals, and they like to eat mayo on their fries, and so you were ticked off about that. And the reason you were ticked off about that is because you do some weird things, but you don't want people to think that you're weird, okay? And so I hate to be the bearer of bad news, okay, but I'm just going to tell you like it is because I'm your pastor. I love you. I think you deserve to hear the truth. You are a little weird, okay? Whether you understand that or not, we all do some things that are a little bit weird, the things that kind of leave other people scratching their head, asking the question, who does that? And so I'm going to give you some examples of things that I've observed since moving here to the coast about 5.5 years ago that might just be seen as outsiders looking in. That's a little bit weird, okay? So let's just start with this one, all right? I know it's raining outside right now, but the sun's going to come out later today, and a lot of you are loving these warmer temperatures because you love to be on a boat. Anybody love to be out on the boat? Let me see your hands, okay? Even if it's your buddy's boat. Like, maybe you even really love to be on the boat because you don't even have to pay for it, okay? So here's what happens, okay? Around this time of the year, you're going to get on a boat, maybe your own boat, okay? And you're going to go on a little trip, okay? And you're going to drive your boat around somewhere between 100, maybe up to 150 miles round trip, okay? You're going to be out in the scorching heat all day. The humidity's going to be really, really high. You're going to be out there. You're going to spend somewhere between $400 and $500 in gas, and you're going to come back home and you are going to be so proud of the 2 fish that you caught while you're out there, right? Like, that's you, right? Well, we ask ourselves, man, if you're an outsider, I'm telling you, people are looking at people on the coast and they're going, who does that? And the truth is, we do that, right? That's what we do if we live here on the coast. It's just fun, but to outsiders who don't understand our culture and they don't understand our way of life, they look at that and they think it's a little weird. They look at that and they ask, who does that, right? How about this one? Let's talk for just a second about what we eat. Can we do that? Can we just admit that maybe sometimes we eat things that are a little bit strange that most people don't eat? I mean, let's talk about mud bugs, okay? All right, I don't know about you, but when I hear the name mud bugs, there's nothing appetizing about that name, okay? Like I don't think, oh, mud, I want to eat that. And I certainly don't think bugs, I want to eat that. So what do? We go change the name, right? We change the name and we call it crawfish. Now look at that. Is there anything about that looks like a fish to you? No, right? It's almost like we're trying to talk ourselves into eating it, right? Like this is what we do. We try to use language because we're trying to talk ourselves. But the truth is if you've lived on the coast for any length of time at all, you eat it, you enjoy it, it's got great flavor. But if you're an outsider looking in, then you kind of look at that and you think, man, that's a little strange, that's a little weird. Who does that? But the truth is, we do stuff like this all the time. And it's not just true for people who live on the coast. It's also true for those of us who are followers of Jesus. Jesus does some things that most people who are not followers of Jesus, they don't do. And Jesus not only does things that are a little bit strange or a little bit different, but he expects his followers to do things that are a little bit strange or a little bit different. And if you're outside the Christian community, then you might look at people who are inside the Christian community and you might think to yourself, man, who does that? But the answer is followers of Jesus do that. He's called us to a different way of life. Now, I need you to understand something about this series. This series is actually part of a greater study in the book of John. And so I need to remind you of that, okay? John, the guy who wrote this book, he spent 3 years of his life with Jesus, watching everything that Jesus did. He spent 3 years of his life with Jesus, listening to everything that Jesus said. And then what he did is he wrote it all down in this book so that future generations might understand who Jesus is and why we need Jesus in our lives. Now, as you read through this book, what you've seen so far, if you've been here from the beginning of this study, is you've seen that in the first 5 chapters of this book, what John does is he talks about who Jesus is, and he talks to us about why we should believe in Jesus. But after he gets past chapter 5, he starts to move in a new direction. He's not just talking about what you believe about Jesus. Then he starts talking about how you should be a follower of Jesus. It's the natural progression of this book, and it really should be the natural progression in our lives. At first, we come to a place where we understand enough about Jesus that we know he came into the world to die for the sins of the world, and we recognize and we believe that he died for our sins. So we believe some things about Jesus. But the expectation is that over the course of your life, you would grow from being just a believer in Jesus to actually being a follower of Jesus. That as that relationship gets started with Jesus, the expectation is that you would get to know Jesus, that you might admire some things about Jesus, that you will develop respect for Jesus. And as those things naturally happen over the course of your life, you'll find yourself going, man, I need to be more like Jesus. You'll see a lot of areas in your life where your life would be better if you were living like Jesus. In fact, when I look at the life of Jesus, what I see is I see that Jesus doesn't just call people to live life in a way that's just a little bit different. Jesus calls his followers to live their life in a way that is radically different. When it comes to all of the issues that shape your life and affect who you are and the life you live, Jesus is calling you to a radically different way of doing life. When it comes to things like sex, money, power, relationships, issues of forgiveness, right? Jesus is calling you to a radically different way of doing life. And so my question for you is this: would you describe yourself as someone who is simply a follower of Jesus, or would you describe yourself as a believer in Jesus? Because there are a lot of people who kind of get stuck in that believer stage. And yet what Jesus wants for you is he wants you to mature and he wants you to grow from simply being a believer in Jesus to being someone who is truly a follower of Jesus. So when it comes to all of those issues, the issues of sex and money and power and relationships and marriage and forgiveness, he's not calling you to be just a little different. What Jesus calls his followers to be is he calls us to be the exact opposite of what we often see in the world. And so Jesus calls people to love rather than hate. And he doesn't just want you to love the people that you kind of like. He doesn't just want you to love the people that you agree with. He doesn't just want you to love the people in your family. You know what he wants you to do? He wants you to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That's not just a little different. That's the exact opposite of what we see in the world today. When it comes to other issues, Jesus is calling us to practice forgiveness rather than exercising vengeance. Jesus has called us to be people who are generous rather than be people who are greedy. Jesus has called us to spend our lives serving others rather than using one another. Jesus has modeled for us that the way in which we're supposed to live our lives is we use our power not to lift ourselves up, but to lift other people up. That this is the way that Jesus did life. And I'll tell you that if you dare to do life the way Jesus did life, then people are going to look at you and they're going to ask, who does that? But the answer is Followers of Jesus do that. If you can get past your insecurities that are associated with what other people think about you, if you can get past the fear of the unknown, if you can truly trust that His way is not just different, it's actually better, then you can live the life that God created you to live. Then you can live your life like Jesus, which is a far better way to be human. And so with all that in mind, I want to take you back today to John chapter 6, where Jesus and His disciples have just fed like 20,000 people. They're coming off a big win, and the reason they're coming off a big win is because they just spent their whole day serving others rather than living for themselves. Who does that? Followers of Jesus do that. But that is not the only strange thing that Jesus and His followers do. Check it out, John chapter 6, verses 16 to 21. When evening came, His disciples went down to the lake, where they got into the boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water. And they were frightened. But He said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take Him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. So, context, last week, earlier in the chapter, John chapter 6, what we saw is that followers of Jesus, they don't spend their lives living for themselves. Instead, we spend our lives serving other people. This week, we see that that is not the only strange thing that followers of Jesus do. This week, we see that followers of Jesus set aside their fear of the unknown, and they willingly step into uncertainty. And that is weird. Most people in the world do not live their life that way. Most people in our world today, they do not like uncertainty. Instead, we like certainty. Most people in the world today, they want a money-back guarantee. Most people in the world today are assessing things like risk management. Most people in the world today, they want a safety net. They want insurance on everything they own. And most people in the world today are reluctant to ever take a real risk. In John's version of the story, the disciples, they take off. They're halfway across the lake, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Jesus comes to them walking on the water. Now, I need you to know that this is not just something that Jesus does. This is something that Jesus invites His followers to do as well. He wants us to so trust Him that we're willing to step into the uncertainty with Jesus. See, Jesus was not the only one who walked on the water that day. One of His followers walked on the water that day with Him. I want you to listen to Matthew's version of the same story, Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 26. When the disciples saw Him walking on the water, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," He said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. When he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out His hand and caught him. "You of little faith," He said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped Him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Now, one of the reasons that I love this story is because this story teaches us that there is always a purpose to the adversity that you're dealing with in your life. So I want to talk today a lot about the issue of adversity. Now, here's what you need to know. Adversity is one of those things that no one likes, but everyone has to go through it. At some point in your life, you're going to deal with a storm. At some point in your life, you're going to run into some challenging situations. At some point in your life, you are going to deal with adversity. It is inevitable. You're going to go through it. The only question is, will you get anything out of it? These guys, these followers of Jesus, they are going through real adversity, all kinds of it. They are alone. Jesus is not with them. He sent them out on a boat by themselves. They're in the dark. They're in the middle of a lake. They're caught up in the middle of a storm. The wind is blowing. The water is rough. And they are physically exhausted. Remember, they have just spent the entire day serving food to 20,000 different people. That's a lot of people. They are worn out. They are exhausted. They are tired. These guys are now rowing against the wind, and the wind is so strong they've been rowing all night, and they're only 3 to 4 miles into what would have been a 6 to 8 mile trip. These guys are fighting all kinds of adversity. They're fighting wind. They're fighting rough waters. They're fighting exhaustion, and they're fighting their own fears. Jesus had to talk about the issue of fear multiple times. That's a lot of adversity. In fact, when I read that, I thought that's like Bob Seger running against the wind kind of adversity. Anybody remember that song of Bob Seger fans out there, right? Like that dude said he had been running against the wind his entire life. That's what that song's all about. And the reason so many people love that song is because they feel the exact same way. You feel like your whole life, you've been having to overcome all kinds of adversity. You weren't born with a silver spoon in your mouth. You've had to fight for everything that you have in life. You spent your whole life running against the wind, swimming upstream, going against the grain, walking uphill to school both ways. Anybody, right? Like we hear these kinds of phrases all the time. Now, have you ever thought about why we have so many phrases to talk about and to describe the adversity that we face in life? I think it's because we like talking about, or maybe even complaining about, how hard our life is. I think some people like to talk about the adversity in their life because they want people to know how strong that they are. I think some people like to talk about adversity in their life because they want everybody to know that there's a really good excuse for why I haven't accomplished more. I think some people like to talk about the adversity in their life because they want people to feel sorry for them. But for whatever reason, we like to talk about the adversity that we're up against in our lives. And we talk a lot about the adversity, but I rarely hear anyone talking about the purpose of the adversity. There was a point to all of this. Jesus sent them into this situation for a reason. According to Matthew chapter 14, verse 22, the disciples have just finished feeding like 20,000 people, and then we're told immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. So get this, okay? Jesus walks down, everybody's finishing up their meal, they're packing up the leftovers in the to-go box, and he puts them in a boat, and he makes them get into the boat, and he sends them across and says, I'll meet you on the other side. Jesus goes back to the crowd. Jesus says to the crowd, thank you guys for being with us today. Hope you'll join us next week for part 3 of our series called Who Does That? He dismisses the crowd. He sends them all home. The only question is, why would Jesus send them into that situation? It's a really important question, not to understand the story. It's a really important question because this is the question that we're asking when we're in the middle of our own story. When we find ourselves in the middle of a storm, when we find ourselves in the middle of a situation we really don't want to be in, most of us start asking questions like, God, why did you let this happen to me? God, why are you putting me through this? I mean, be honest with yourself. Be honest with me, okay? When things aren't going the way you think they need to go, how many of you feel compelled to blame somebody for it? Anybody like me? Okay, like that's me. Ask my wife, ask my son. They're both in the room right now. They could tell you, I go around my house going, who left the garage door up? It's 90 degrees outside, right? Who left the milk out on the counter? Like I feel the need to blame someone when things aren't going the way that I think they should go. And I'm telling you right now that if I were in the boat that day, I would have been asking, why did Jesus make us get into this boat? Why did Jesus send us into the middle of this storm? Did he not check the weather app? Did he not look at Wind Finder to see if the wind was going to die down that night or if it was going to be like kicking up? Like, what's his deal? And listen, a lot of us do this when we're running into adversity. In fact, some of you are going through something right now and you are so busy blaming God that you can't even see the purpose of God. That there's a reason that he has you going through what you're going through. And yet you're so mad about what you're going through that you can't see why you're going through it. The reason that Jesus put them in that boat and knowingly sent them into that storm is because Jesus knows that adversity has the potential to develop great things in you. Do you believe that? Do you believe that adversity has the potential to develop great things in you? That it has the potential to develop things in you that would never be produced in you if life was always great for you. I mean, we say things like this all the time. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And that's the kind of stuff we say out there. But it's like we forget all about it when we come in here and we start shaking our finger in the face of God and start wondering, God, why are you making me go through this? It's because there's something in the adversity that he wants to do for you or grow in you that you would never get if it wasn't for adversity and hardship in your life. Paul talked about this in a letter that he wrote to a group of Christians who were living in the city of Rome in the first century. Romans chapter 5, verses 3 and 4. Listen to what he said. He said, we glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character, hope. Now, I think most outsiders read that and we think we glory in our sufferings. Who does that? Answer, followers of Jesus do that because we understand that God uses the toughest moments to produce some of our greatest growth. You've all heard the phrase, no pain, no gain. That's not just true in the gym. That's true in life. And so when you find yourself in the middle of the storm, you have to stop asking the question, how quickly is God going to get me out of this? And you've got to start asking the question, what does God want me to get out of this? You know what Jesus wanted them to get out of this whole situation? A stronger faith. Because Jesus understands that faith is what takes you from living a very ordinary life to living an extraordinary life. I look around our world and what I see is I see people who are living in a culture that is riddled with fear. People are very fearful, and because of that, they end up living an ordinary life. But when you move from being a person of fear to being a person of faith, you can move from living an ordinary life to living an extraordinary life. Everything about this story is designed to build their faith in Jesus. Jesus had a purpose and Jesus had a plan, and his plan was not to keep them safe and comfortable. I know that's what you want for your life. I just don't know if that's what he wants for your life. If he wanted them to all be safe and comfortable, then he failed. Because he showed up late, and by the time he showed up, these people were already in real danger. And not only were they in real danger, but they were really afraid. Okay? Now, I know they didn't want anybody to know that they were afraid, because they were a couple of, tough, crusty old sailors who spent their whole life fishing, and they should not be afraid in a storm in the middle of the night. But these guys were afraid. And Jesus actually had to speak to them multiple times about the fears that they were feeling in their lives. It was a scary situation. They were there, it was dark, the winds were whipping, the waves were crashing, and on top of all that, they see something that they can't explain. They see Jesus walking to him on top of the water, and because they can't explain it, they're afraid of it. And this happens all the time in our lives. When we're going through things and dealing with adversity and hardship, if we can't explain it, we get afraid of it. And that fear starts to creep into our lives. It's the fear of the unknown that ends up paralyzing us, and it keeps us from being able to make progress or to make big moves in the midst of adversity. And yet what I want to say to you today is that at some point, you've got to move in your relationship with Jesus from being overwhelmed with fear to being inspired by faith. That when your faith starts to grow, what it does is it leads you to step into the uncertainty. And so what Jesus does is Jesus says, I'm going to talk to them. And I'm going to say some things that will cause the fear in them to die, and it's going to cause the faith in them to actually grow. And so Jesus said to them, he said, take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. He wants them to know that he is on the scene, that he is there, he is present with them, he is with them in the middle of the storm. And when they hear those words, the fear starts to die and the faith starts to grow. Now, I need you to understand something about faith and fear. Faith will not remove all of the fear that you feel, but faith will lead you to move in spite of the fear that you feel. Faith is what prompted Peter to step into the uncertainty. There were a lot of things that Peter didn't know. But what Peter did know that day is that Jesus was calling him. And what Peter would later learn is that Jesus was there to catch him even if he did fall. And so I want you to learn something today and understand something today about your relationship with Jesus. In every relationship that you have with Jesus or with anybody else in your life, you have experiences. And those experiences that you have with other people, those experiences are either building trust or those experiences are breaking trust. When trust gets built, the relationship always gets better. And so Jesus is using these experiences to build their trust and to better their relationship with him. That's what this entire section of John's gospel is all about. And he does the same thing for you and me. What Jesus wants them to know is he wants them to know, man, you can trust me no matter what. He wants to use these experiences to deepen your faith and to better the relationship with him. And so let me ask you right here, right now, do you figure out who you can really trust when everything is going great? Or do you figure out who you can really trust when everything is going wrong? It's not a trick question. We find out a lot when everything is going wrong. You find out who you can really depend on and who you can really count on when everything in life seems to be falling apart. When you find yourself in a really scary situation. And what Jesus is doing in this entire section is he wants his people to know, you can depend on me when everything is going great. When we're feeding 20,000 people on a few pieces of fish and a few loaves of bread. And you can depend on me and trust me when everything is going wrong. When you are in the middle of a storm, when you're surrounded by darkness, when you're physically exhausted, when things are outside of your control, you can always depend on me. And so let me ask you this. Do you really believe that? Do you really believe that you can always trust Jesus? Or let me ask it like this. How strong would you say your faith is? Scale of 1 to 4. How strong would you say your faith is? Do you know when Jesus finally caught up with these guys? We're told, according to Matthew 14:25, that he caught up with them right before dawn. Other versions of the story tell us that he caught up with them in the 4th watch of the night. Now, I know most of us, we're not sailors, we don't understand this language, but if you're in the sailor community, you might get this, okay? In their culture, they have like what they call a first watch, a second watch, a third watch, and a fourth watch. So if you're going to be out on the ocean all night, you can't stay up all night and make sure that you're not running aground or running into something out there, okay? And so somebody's going to keep watch. First watch was from like 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. at night. And so I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, I'm calling dibs on first watch because I go to bed at 9 o'clock, okay? So I got first watch if I'm in that boat. And then there's second watch. Second watch is 9 p.m. to midnight. And then there's third watch. Third watch is midnight to 3 a.m. And then there's fourth watch that's 3 a.m. to 6 o'clock in the morning, right before dawn. Jesus didn't show up until the fourth watch of the night. And so let me ask you again, how strong is your faith in Jesus? You got first watch faith? Second or third watch kind of faith? Or do you have fourth watch kind of faith? Because this right here is the issue that Jesus had to address with Peter. When Peter sees Jesus walking out on the water, he says, hey, Jesus, if it's really you, tell me to come to you and walk to you on the water. And so Jesus says, come on, big boy. And so Peter steps out of the boat. He puts all of his weight onto the surface of the water, and it holds. And he starts walking toward Jesus. And as he's walking toward Jesus, he is locked in, and all of a sudden, he starts looking around at the waves and the wind that's whipping, and when he does that, we're told that he falls. He starts to sink, and Jesus reaches out, and Jesus grabs a hold of him and picks him up. And he says to Peter, he says, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And if I'm Peter, and I admit I'm a little prideful at times, but if I'm Peter, I am really offended at what Jesus just said to me. Little faith? Let's just take a survey of everybody that's on the scene right now, and let's talk about little faith. Because I'm looking back over here, and there's old Judas in the boat. That dude's got no faith, okay? I'm looking at the rest of these jokers, and I'm going, like, they won't even move. Like, they've got the white-knuckle death grip holding on for dear life. They've got a little faith. Do you know how much faith it takes to get out of that boat, to put all of your weight on the water, to believe that it will hold you while you walk toward Jesus? That's not a little faith. That's a big faith. But Jesus called it little faith. And it may be that Jesus' comment about Peter's faith is not in how big it was, but is instead about how long it lasted. It didn't last very long. It was more like first watch kind of faith. Not second watch or third watch, and certainly not fourth watch kind of faith. So again, scale of 1 to 4. How strong is your faith in Jesus? When you're in the middle of the storm, when you're up against a lot of adversity and things are not going your way, do you have first watch, second or third watch, or fourth watch kind of faith? Listen to what James said about faith. James said, "Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life which God has promised to those who love him." There are some people that when the trials come, man, they will be steadfast. That they are immovable and unshakable. And there are a lot of other people that when those trials come, they crumble and cave. They start to blame God when things get hard. They give up on God as soon as things get hard. In fact, Jesus talked about these people. In Matthew chapter 13, verses 20 and 21, listen to what he said. He said, "The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy." They hear the word about Jesus and the teachings, and they think, man, this is great. This is going to change my life. This is going to lead me to eternal life. They receive it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only for a short or a little time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. That's first watch kind of faith right there. Now, I don't know what kind of adversity you're dealing with in your life, but I do know this. There is a purpose in it. And so what I'm asking you to do is I'm asking you to set aside your fear and to live a life that's inspired by faith. Don't be afraid to step into the uncertainty, because there's nothing uncertain about it if Jesus is already out there standing on the water waiting for you. There's nothing uncertain about it if Jesus is calling to you saying, come on, man, get out of the boat and live life a little bit. There's nothing uncertain about it if Jesus has proven that he's already going to be there to catch you even if you start to fall. And so as we close today, I want to take you back to this scene where all of this went down, and I want to show you something that I don't want you to miss. I got a picture of the place where all of this went down. This is a picture of Lake Tiberias. It's also known as the Sea of Galilee. Okay? This is not a very big lake, pretty open lake. It's only about 8 miles wide and about 13 miles long. And the reason that I took you to this view, there's a lot of pictures on the internet of this place, but I wanted to show you a mountain view. And the reason I wanted to show you a mountain view is because the text tells us that Jesus went down with his disciples. He put them in a boat on that lake right there, and he said, go for it to the other side. I'm going to meet you on the other side. Then he went back, dismissed the crowd, but then we're told that between that moment and the fourth watch of the night, he went up on a mountain to be alone with God and to pray. Jesus is sitting up on that mountain, and Jesus is looking down on that lake. And if the moon was out that night, I promise you this, from the mountaintop, Jesus was able to see that boat on the water even though the disciples couldn't see him up on the mountain. And I need you to understand that about your life. I need you to understand that even when you can't see him, you can trust him. I need you to understand about your life that even when it feels like he's late, you can trust him. I need you to understand that even when you're in the middle of a storm, you can trust him. I need you to understand that even when you are physically exhausted, you can trust him. I need you to understand that if he is asking you to step into uncertainty, you can trust him. I understand that there are not a lot of people in this world that you can trust, but you can trust Jesus. And when you believe that, and I mean you've got to really believe that, when you believe that, you will start to follow Jesus into places that you would have never gone before. When you really believe that, you will start to step into situations that you would have never stepped into before. When you really believe that, you will start to do the kinds of things that will leave all of your friends and all of your coworkers and all of your family members asking, who does that? But you do that because you are a follower of Jesus, and followers of Jesus are not people who are paralyzed by fear, but instead we are inspired by our faith. And that right there is why I love adversity in my life. Because I know that if I'm going through adversity, it's because God is using that adversity to prepare me for something bigger and something better that is out in my future. I do not want to live a life that is marked by playing it safe. And listen to me, you don't want to live your life always playing it safe. That's no way to live. You're not a turtle that needs to spend all of life retreating and hiding in your shell. You're a man of God. You are a woman of God, and you were made for so much more. I want to live a life that is marked by adventure. I want to do things that I never thought I could do. And when I get done doing things that I never thought I could do, I want to do things that only God can do. And if that means that we have to walk through a little bit of adversity, then let's toughen up and let's say bring it on, because Jesus is out on the water. Jesus is calling us. Jesus is catching us. And we cannot waste our lives being plagued by fear. Instead, we're going to live our lives inspired by faith in Jesus. Will you pray with me? God, as we think about your word, I hate fear. And I know you hate it too. And so, God, I want to pray over your people today. I want to pray first and foremost for those who have a relationship with Jesus. I pray, God, that you would move us from being believers to being followers. God, I pray over your people that our faith would grow in the midst of all that adversity and all that hardship that we go through, so that we would believe you for bigger and greater things. God, I just pray that your people would have such a big faith in you, that we would be like those in the boat that day. That we would not just know that you're the Son of God, but we would know that you are capable of unbelievable things. That you're calling us to more. That you're calling us to take risks. You're calling us into uncertainty. And I pray, God, that we would have the faith to be followers, not just believers. God, for those who don't know you, I pray that they would look at their life right now. And I pray, God, that they would be so disgusted by a life plagued with fear that they would put their faith in Jesus. I pray, God, that they would trust that Jesus came to forgive their sins and to lead their life. I pray, God, that the gap between being a believer and becoming a follower, I pray the gap would be short, that their faith would grow so far and so fast that they would be quick to follow you and to step into uncertainty so they could live a life that is so much greater than anything they ever dreamed. God, I pray that over all of us today, and I ask it in the powerful name of Jesus. Amen.